Welcome back to Divinity Original Sins 2, the skill guide. I want to share with you the two neutral skills, which is summoning and polymorph. We start with summoning. Summoning, and let's start with neutral skills maybe. Neutral skills are neutral because they are not scaling with any of the main attributes. They are therefore excellent skills to be put into any build because they either have a wonderful passive ability or they are just good complementary skills to splice into some of the builds. We're starting with summoning. Personally, probably one of the best skills in the whole game. It is an extremely strong school. You can do high variants of topics with that school. So if you go into summoning, make sure that you know the ins and outs. First and foremost, to clarify a couple of misconceptions, summoning does not scale with intelligence. There's only at the beginning of the game one skill in summoning that scales with intelligence. You can see that here on the scale part. The dimensional bolt, which is a pretty mediocre skill, scales with it. It's okayish, but I can tell you all of the other ones. You can see an A, an A, an A, an A, an A, an A. So the core message here is really any character can use it. Second core message. Summoning, in contrast to any other school, gets a huge bonus when you reach 10. It will get your incarnates to a level where the incarnates basically transform into an incarnate on steroids, which is specifically between level 8 and level 18, almost game-breakingly strong. You should know that, and we will go into that in a second. Before we go into the skills, let me give you a little bit of an advice why I would think that summoning is an excellent additional skill for many of the builds. Number one, if you skill summoning, you do not necessarily exclusively need to go into summoning. Matter of fact, what many people seem to misunderstand or miscomprehend when they put together builds is they're always looking to maximize, for instance, as a caster, one casting damage. And that's fine, I get that. It's not bad. But instead of then going into Huntsman and Scoundrel to just maximize the crits and even have more damage when you're on high ground, there is likewise another train of thoughts, which means you can put 10 points into summoning or have gear that boosts summoning and put a couple of points in summoning so that in summary you still reach the 10 points and you will gain a very strong result. Because the incarnates themselves present very noticeable bodies on the battlefield, and they will deal a significant amount of damage. More so, they do have low cooldowns. So if you're playing a caster, a Hydromancer for instance, or Pyromancer, and you struggle with your cooldown usage, then summoning gives you the in-between cooldowns to be just very useful. Matter of fact, it lets you do something every turn. That's number one that you need to understand and know about summoning. Number two, summoning is probably the most versatile school of all of it. Your incarnate and your totems that you will summon are based on the ground that you're summoning them on, which means your summoner can fit either perfectly into a magical party or into a physical party. It can cater its abilities towards what's needed on the battlefield. You have not enough healing, summon water-based creatures, so summon the incarnates on water. You need physical damage, go with either blood or earth incarnates. You need magical damage. I recommend either oil, so earth, or fire incarnates. You basically can inspect the enemy and see what the enemy is weak against, and the summoner will always have something against the weakness of the enemy. So that is something that people do not realize. By always having the right skill, you will automatically deal plus X%. Many of the enemies later are vulnerable 60, 70, 80% against a special element, and you get that damage bonus, quote unquote, for free, just by being clever and inspecting the enemy. Last great advantage of this school, which is probably more prominent in this school than in any other school. If you conjure an incarnate up front, and if you give the incarnate its buffs up front, you will have an extra body on the battlefield right away. You did not need to spend any action points during the combat, so whatever you did up front, it will just help you in your combat. It is so strong that it helped me in my honor run plus, where I fought an honor run with twice the amount of enemies and 75% less XP. It helped me through the first chapters, and summoning definitely was one of the schools that helped through this. Probably it was one of the carrying schools. Now let's take a look at what the core of the build is going to look like. I want to highlight that there are some defensive or some utility abilities first and foremost. And let me talk about the utility ones first. Number one, Rallying Cry, which is a healing ability that restores vitality and magical armor. Very, very strong ability, in my opinion, highly underrated. If you cluster your characters up, or if a character is surrounded by enemies, it will heal a lot of vitality and a lot of magical armor, almost as much as to heal the magical armor full. I can recommend it. It costs 2 points, 2 action points, so it's definitely not something you want to do every round. But when you are in the right position, this here can be a lifesaver. Number two, probably the strongest support skill that this school is having, which is Dominate Mind. It does not scale with anything. You can use it on any character that has the school, and the 3 points are ridiculously cheap. Once the enemy has lost all of his magical armor, basically Dominant Mind means that for 2 turns the enemy is on your side. And I cannot stress enough how strong that is. I would advise to use that skill often. Last but not least, the Soulmate ability, which means that a target receives half of you receive half of the healing that a target receives, which is quite nice to bound with a target, but that's not the reason why I would want to use it. Basically, for one mini ability point, you clear these extra conditions: Frozen sucks, Stun sucks, Knockdown sucks, and Petrify sucks. 4 of the main abilities that any enemies are going to use, right there, available for everyone to cleanse. If you're playing with enough mnemonic to have enough skills in your skill bar, there is really no reason to not have Soulmate in your skill bar. Good. That being said, let's look at the bread and butter and really the skills for the beginning. Forget about Dimensional Bolt and Cannibalize. That is shit. The real part of the school comes into play with the totems and with the incarnates. The core of it is the incarnate. I already told you about incarnate and where to summon it. The incarnate is getting incredibly stronger with a summoning level of 10. But what you need to know is that the incarnate gets even stronger with the infusions. Okay, there is a power infusion, which is the physical infusion, giving the incarnate whirlwind and rush as abilities. But it also, and that's it also gives the incarnate additional physical armor, and it doesn't say so here specifically, but it sets power infusion, and power infusion means that the incarnate gets 25% stronger. Cumulative, so other infusions will help to further strengthen. Farsight infusion, second important infusion, will give him a ranged attack, will provide the incarnate with magical armor, and will again increase it by 25%. These two are the core and main buffs that you should definitely have for your incarnate in order to make him a living nightmare. It's just going to slaughter through the enemies. Shadow Infusion is nice to have. It will give him a little bit more movement. No damage buff here, but it can turn invisible, and that is all fine and good. And also Warp Infusion to form more movement, but the core is really the Power Infusion and the Farsight Infusion. Now, if you summon your incarnate, give him the 2 infusions and let it run into combat, you will see that the incarnate is often having as much armor as your tank would normally have, crazy amounts of armor, and on top of it, it will hit like a truck, almost as much as a character with a two-hand weapon. And it's scaling also decently. So until level 18, you should not see that the incarnates are really falling off. At the very late game, incarnates can be a little bit weaker, but here's the thing. Your character at that point will have a second tradition or a second use. Really, once you're done with summoning, you can focus on something else, which means I highly recommend combining this with either a caster or combining this with another proficient. So it really doesn't matter that your buffed up incarnate in the end game is just extraordinarily good and not a godlike status good. So it will be very strong, but not extra strong. To put it into context, it's just an extra tool that you're summoning. You're starting that with round 1, you summon it, it will stay there for a couple of rounds, and it will just work in your favor. The last thing that I wanted to talk you through with summoning skills is an idea that I personally find very intriguing, since the whole school is not focusing on any of the core abilities. I personally like to play the main summoner as a tank. That might sound crazy at the beginning, but hear me out for a second. I find the tank build resonates extremely well with it, because as a tank, you are well advised to take leadership. I talked about that in the first video, in order to let monsters focus on you. If your main skill is summoning, and if you're very much going down the summoning route with a little bit of strength and mainly into constitution, then with a nice summoning, fully focused summon build, 10 points there, and then fully focused leadership build, also 10 points there, and whatever else is left into warfare to get some extra hit points and some defensive skills. That setup works extremely well. If you splice in a little bit of earth and water magic, you can be almost replenishing all of your resources by yourself. You have a very strong crowd control ability. Your incarnate will do the main damage dealing for you, plus your positioning, and that's the real great part about it, is will be between the melee characters and the backline. So your aura for leadership will affect everyone, which is usually a problem in the positioning, because the backline is usually a little bit further back. I hope that made sense, because that was already more towards a concrete build. But if you want to give it a try, just watch my videos and how I'm skilling it. Maybe I'll do a separate build video on it. Summoning, great school overall. Let's move to the last school, which is polymorph.